Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. I stumbled across something I think you guys might enjoy. It's the June 1975 issue of Let It Rock magazine. Do you guys remember that one? It was an interview with Frank Zappa, and they asked him if he would name. It was kind of unclear exactly how they phrased the question, but he listed his favorite songs and or albums, and he mixed them in together. Now goes down there listed one, two, three, four, five, but they don't make clear if they're in any order whatsoever. So we'll assume they are. So in 1975 in June, Frank Zappa's favorite song was Supernaut by Black Sabbath. He says, I think it's from Paranoid, and I don't think that's right. I think it's from Volume 4. But Frank Zappa says, I think it's from Paranoid. I like it because I think it's prototypical of a certain musical style, and I think it's well done. Also, I happen to like the guitar lick that's being played in the background. It's a pretty damn great riff. I don't know if you guys remember that one. That's one of those Black Sabbath songs that doesn't come up very often, but it is a really great guitar riff. But number two, he lists After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. He says the whole album, because it's direct, it's very melodic, and it sounds like a bunch of demos. I think that in that quick little one sentence, that summed up a whole lot of what I like about Neil Young. It's the whole album because it's very direct, it's very melodic, and it sounds like a bunch of demos. That's a lot of what I dig about Neil. He has these great songs that are melodic, and he gets right to the point in most of them, and you know exactly. I don't know. They don't beat around the bush. Some of the best Neil songs get right to it and hit you. They come from the heart, and they sound like a bunch of demos. I like how ragged Neil's stuff is, and the stuff that I like best about Neil Young is the fact that I don't know, it just feels so, it's never overproduced, or it's rarely feels overproduced, and that's why Tonight's the Night is my favorite Neil Young album. So there's mistakes all over it, and tuning is a second thought, but the whole thing is so effective to me. I mean, he airs on the side of the heart on that album, and I love it. If there's such thing as an honest album, I always say that's one of them. And my joke is, what's the best Neil Young album, and why is it Tonight's the Night? Why don't you guys tell me what's the best Neil Young album, and you tell me in the comments, and tell me what's your favorite Frank Zappa album. Before I continue with this list, I'm going to say I always go back to We're Only in It for the Money. I got that when I was in high school. I think one of my uncles gave that to me, and I love it. I still dig it, and it's the mothers of invention. I dig Zappa in that era. I dig other stuff, but if I'm going to listen to a Zappa album for some reason, We're Only in It for the Money is the one that I go to. Is there a Zappa album you go to? I don't know. There's plenty of great Zappa stuff, but so when I go over to the Wikipedia entry for After the Gold Rush, the Neil Young album, I should point out, you guys know the photo on the cover of After the Gold Rush. It's Neil walking past like an iron fence, and there's a woman. He's going to the side, and there's a woman passing from behind him. I don't know if you've seen the larger, like the full-size picture. This is a crop of a larger picture, and Graham Nash is behind Neil, like walking behind him in the same direction in the full-size picture. It's kind of neat to see it. And I guess the photo was out of focus, or Neil was out of focus, so the photographer went ahead and did some kind of solarizing or something to the picture to cover that up or whatever. But I was in New York. That photo was taken in New York on a street corner. And man, I was there 7 years ago, 8 years ago, somewhere around in there. And I looked up that street corner and I found it. And that metal fence or whatever it is still there. And when you get there, you're like, oh, this is the place. This is it right here. But some of you are thinking, Otis, why in the hell would you go look for that when you're in New York? Why would you look up the spot of a Neil Young album cover? And those of you asking that question have probably not been here for very long. And those of you who have been watching these videos for a while, you know exactly why I did. I'm kind of hopeless that way. So as I scroll down this Wikipedia entry, there's a couple things that I think are interesting. So I looked up the Wikipedia entry for After the Gold Rush, just trying to refresh my brain about some of this. There's a couple things I found interesting. It says the songs on the album were inspired by the Dean Stockwell Herb Berman screenplay for the unmade film After the Gold Rush. Young had read the screenplay and asked Stockwell if he could produce the soundtrack. Tracks that Young recalls as being written specifically for the film are After the Gold Rush and Cripple Creek Ferry. The script has since been lost, though it has been described as sort of an end-of-the-world movie. Now, I thought this part here was interesting. Graham Nash has claimed that Only Love Can Break Your Heart was written for him in the aftermath of his breakup with Joni Mitchell. The thing that sticks in my head about that is I saw a picture of Joni Mitchell's apartment during that, or her house during that period. And I believe her and Graham were in the house, and it was just beautiful. You know, it wasn't that it was some palace or anything like that, but it was just decorated so well. It seemed so homey and perfect, and it was somebody with really good taste that just knew how to arrange things, and it just looked beautiful. It was of a time, you know, and it's that time in California that I get a little bit nostalgic for, you know, and would like to, when you talk about places you'd like to go back in time, California in the mid 60s would be a pretty neat place to be. There's a lot of places that would be neat places to be, and I also, when I saw that picture for the first time, I remember Graham Nash saying that him and Joni Mitchell they went to an antique store or something, and when they got back, and I guess she bought a vase or a vase or whatever, and when they got back to the house, they were getting out of the car, and I think Graham said, "I'll light the fire, and you place the flowers in the vase that you bought today," and he kind of like sat back and thought, "That's pretty good. That's interesting." And he went inside and he wrote "Our House," about that house that you see in the picture, this beautiful, wonderful little, you know, thing that was their lives in that moment in time, and we get to peek into through some of these photos. That comes into my head. I didn't know that "Only Love Can Break Your Heart," that Graham thinks that was written about their breakup, but I do think it's interesting. It says After the Gold Rush is one of 4 high-profile albums, all charting within the top 15, released by each of the members of folk rock collective Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in the wake of their chart-topping 1970 album Deja Vu. Right after that album, all 4 members release albums that chart in the top 15. That's pretty amazing for a group. And so Neil Young has After the Gold Rush. Stephen Stills has a Stephen Stills album. Let's see, If I Could Only Remember My Name, David Crosby, and Songs for Beginners, Graham Nash. That's all within, what is it, a year or so? That's pretty amazing. I thought that was neat. But we'll go back to Frank Zappa. Number 3 on this list, he has the Rolling Stones, Between the Buttons. And I'm going to be honest, I would not have thought, I thought maybe Frank Zappa would like Black Sabbath, maybe, but I wouldn't have really guessed it. I don't think I would have thought that Frank would have liked Neil Young's music. I think they would have got along as people. But and maybe they were friends, I don't know. Maybe you guys know that. But I didn't expect him to like the Rolling Stones. It just doesn't seem like the stuff that Frank Zappa would like. But it says, Between the Buttons, the Rolling Stones. Frank Zappa says, the American release. I don't like the English version so much because it contains a totally different set of tunes. I understand that they don't like the album very much, but I thought that it was an important piece of social comment at the time. I remember seeing Brian Jones very drunk in the speakeasy one night and telling him I liked it and thought it was superior to Sgt. Pepper, whereupon he belched discreetly and turned around and walked away. Brian Jones belched discreetly and turned around. I don't know. He probably thought Zappa was messing with him, which Zappa was known to do back then or any other time. But I don't think that album is better than Sgt. Pepper. But I do think it got Ruby Tuesday and Let's Spend the Night Together. I think those are the hits off of there. I think those are great. I think it's a cool album, and I think it's neat that Zappa appreciated it. When I say Let's Spend the Night Together, it's something that comes up in my brain. I remember getting a rental car years ago, a long time ago, 15 years ago, and something was going on with the rental car where somebody adjusted it so that the music was only coming out of this one speaker over here, or it was all panned to one side for some reason. And there's some songs from that era that come up, and you would only hear vocals in one side or whatever. And I don't remember how the mix worked, but I believe the bass was on one side, and maybe just vocals and bass or whatever. But the bass on Let's Spend the Night Together, I think that track is great. I mean, I really think it's great. So there's a lesson to be learned here. When you just heard it with the bass out of context, the bass was really flubby and inconsistent. It really didn't sound good at all. I mean, it was kind of all over the place, and the tone of it was just real flubby, just not a lot to it. But when you hear it all together, it sounds freaking great. And there's a pretty good lesson to be learned right there about context. And if you're working on your mix and you're isolating this one instrument and trying to make it perfect, it doesn't matter what it sounds like by itself. It matters what the whole sounds like. And that was a pretty good lesson for me. So now I always listen for the bass when I hear Let's Spend the Night Together. And maybe there's only some releases that it's panned real hard, but you know what I'm talking about. A lot of those 60s records, when stereo was becoming a thing, they were panning pretty ridiculously. But that's a good lesson to learn. And I'm not putting down Bill Wyman. I think that his bass playing is super cool. There's nothing wrong with the Stones musically at all, I don't think. I love the Stones. But, and Frank liked that album. And number 4, he says, the American issue of Abbey Road, which has nothing to do with the material on the album. See, I wouldn't have thought that he would have picked a Beatles thing either, number 4. But here it is. He says, the American issue of Abbey Road. Frank says, it has nothing to do with the material on the album, but because I think it's probably the best mastered, best engineered rock and roll record I've ever heard. Except that I take exception to the choice of stereo placement. There's a lot of people that agree with you on the stereo stuff, Frank, but Frank Zappa believed Abbey Road was the best mastered and the best engineered rock and roll record he'd ever heard up until 1975. That's pretty amazing. I think that's pretty amazing. I just would not expect Zappa to be digging some of these things he's saying he digs. Number 5 is the first Muddy Waters album, Because It's Wonderful. I would expect Zappa to appreciate that. We'll skip down. There's a lot of different stuff here. Over in the, let's see, 3 Hours Past Midnight, Johnny Guitar Watson, one of the best guitar solos on an R&B record. That's what Zappa says. Also, Who Will Be Next by Howlin' Wolf, because it's very serious. The Story of My Life by Guitar Slim, another of the best guitar solos on an R&B record. And he goes down and he says, recently I've been listening to Mott the Hoople's Mott the Hoople album. I enjoy every cut except for the Golden Age of Rock and Roll. So Frank has to point out the one cut he doesn't like on the album. And he also says that anything that Richard Berry did, without getting the credit for it, he made so much of what happened in R&B possible, and so many people wouldn't have been there at all without him. He was one of the most important secret sources behind the West Coast R&B in the 50s, and now he's walking around trying to get a record contract. And this says, I don't know whether this is Frank talking or the person who did the interview, but it says, I interviewed him when I did a piece for Life magazine. Now, maybe Frank wrote a piece for Life magazine or something. Maybe this is Frank talking. It says, I interviewed him when I did a piece for Life magazine, and he told me he sold the rights for Louie Louie for $5,000. He was working with a Latin band at a place called Harmony Park Ballroom, and the band had an instrumental that went, and he sings the Louie Louie rhythm. And he scribbled the lyrics out on a paper napkin in the dressing room. It's always been one of my favorite fantasies that songs like Wooly Bully get written on a lunch bag in blue crayon. I think that's Zappa saying all of that. I love Wooly Bully. Is that Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, or is that the Hollywood Argyles? I don't remember which that is. I'm really ashamed of myself for forgetting that, but I love that. I think it's Sam the Sham. Anyway, the Louie Louie story makes me think of when I was still in high school, I discovered that there were people like Louis Grizzard down in Georgia writing columns every day that were kind of human interest stuff, and they would interview regular guys, regular gals. They would interview people that were somewhat famous. They were somewhat on the margins. All of this interested me greatly, as you can probably tell. As a kid, I loved Charles Kuralt, Studs Terkel. I loved so many things like this. So when I discovered there were these regional people like Louis Grizzard, and I'm forgetting who else, that would write these columns, and they'd do it every day, but they would find one, and they were very popular, and they started to get syndicated. And another person was a guy named Bob Greene out of Chicago. I believe he wrote for the Tribune. I believe that's right, the Chicago Tribune. And now Bob Greene, this is all ugly because he ended up having some scandal where there was a very young girl and his career all went to hell. He destroyed his legacy and everything. So it's probably one of those people I shouldn't even bring up. But he would write the same sort of articles, and they made books of collections of these, and I remember getting some of these, and there was an article that he did where he looked up the guy who wrote Louie Louie, and I seem to remember the guy was a janitor somewhere in a high school or something. This is all, I'm talking about something that I read 35 or 40 years ago and hadn't really thought about it since. So the accuracy in what I'm saying may be really, really bad and messed up. So give me a little leeway on this. But he found this guy and he interviewed him and he did an article. But I did a lot of stuff like this, which I loved that kind of thing as a kid, these weird anecdotes about. But the fact he looked him up and talked about remember that record was banned from radio because it was supposedly dirty and all of that. But looked that guy up. So when I see the Louie Louie thing, that sticks in my head. Maybe that's online. I haven't thought about any of that in forever, so maybe that stuff's online. I seem to remember there was he interviewed Bob Seger once and asked him completely different questions than you would expect. But I like that kind of thing. But that's the Frank Zappa article. I'm going to answer a couple questions while we're still rolling here. You guys, let's see, I asked earlier if you could tell me what's your favorite Stone stuff, your favorite Neil Young stuff. If you like any of this stuff that Zappa, any thoughts on any of that, tell me. And your favorite Zappa stuff. But I have a couple questions that you guys asked me. And Steve Spear says, have you ever interviewed Emmylou Harris or Mark Knopfler? I've not interviewed Mark Knopfler, never met him. I played a guitar that he gave to someone once, but I don't think I can say that. There's a lot of things I've done that I don't think I can talk about publicly. So I played one of Mark Knopfler's a guitar that he played for a while and he gave to someone, and that was super damn cool. I did interview Emmylou Harris once, just a couple years ago, as a matter of fact, and that was for a project that I'm working on, and it's like a secret project that I can't really talk about, and it may never happen, but the interview is like in the archives, and she was nice enough to go along with that. I'd love to do a public one day that I could share on the channel, but I don't know that will ever happen or whatever. But yes, so Stephen, and then I believe Stephen asked another question. God forbid, but do you think any bands will embrace the AI technology to create? He says, I sure hope not. I'm sorry to tell you, Steve, but they're already doing it. I've heard that down the people on Music Row, the people writing those terrible country songs that you hear on country radio now and all that, they're all doing it. They've been doing it for, as soon as it came out, they started trying to come up with lyrics. And let's be honest, I mean, the stuff's pretty impressive, and it's pretty impressive what it's able to do. But the bar's not really high on those hit country songs, today or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if, you could get a Scrabble board and throw letters down and come up with some of those lyrics. What's the Tom Waits? I think a Tom Waits quote about I could eat alphabet soup and shit better lyrics than that. That probably goes along in that. So, I saw a couple days ago that there's AI out there. Somebody's made the Beatles voices singing a Beach Boys song. Was it God Only Knows? I didn't click on it and watch it, but it's out there, and I have no doubt that it's probably pretty convincing. But somebody's still got to write those songs, and somebody's got to play them. And I'm not worried about it. I don't really, I probably won't live long enough to where it's really going to bug me that much. And there's tools that people will use that are terrible. Like some of the worst music is made with synthesizers and all of that. But man, there's some cool synthesizer stuff out there. People probably thought that way about electric guitar. And when it came around, I don't really know. It's nothing I care to deal with. I like the human. I like the human. I like to hear like people imperfect voices, and I don't really see artificial intelligence, people worrying about that. I think it's just like auto-tune and things like that, where people will be so worried about making everything so perfectly in tune and in time and all of that it'll just be stale, and nobody will be interested in trying to create Tonight's the Night. Can you imagine somebody who's interested in AI trying to put together Tired Eyes? It's like, that's the stuff I'm interested in, is like Neil playing Tired Eyes, and it just, you feel so much of that if you like it. Maybe you don't feel anything when you listen to it. I feel a lot when I listen to it. Or Tonight's the Night, or it's too dark to put the keys in my ignition. All of that album. So much great stuff. Look Out Joe. I feel that stuff, and it's imperfect in every way. It feels very human to me. And I'm surprised that anybody who's interested in artificial intelligence would even care about that kind of music. They're drawn to that stuff because you're drawn to things that come out of computers. If you're drawn to things that humans create, very flawed human beings create, from a flawed palate, but an honest place and from heart. I don't think you're drawn to computers and AI and stuff like that. I don't know. It doesn't, but there'll be good stuff come out of it. There'll be a lot of good stuff. Doctors will use it, and I don't know. I'm just not. I don't. They'll be bad and they'll be good. I don't want to take a side on this because I don't think I know enough about it to guess. But I'd be surprised if somebody just all of a sudden turns around a Hank Williams song. Nobody's going to write Sam Stone with AI. Prime stuff won't be done. That's my guess. I don't think somebody's going to be trying to come up with an AI Lucinda Williams voice. Maybe they will. So somebody's watching this and they're going to do all of this just to spite me. That's just the way life works. But Brian Mobley, who's one of my Patreon supporters, hey Brian, and you guys, I appreciate you supporting there, man. As a Southern Hoosier myself, I was wondering what some of my memories of growing up. He says that for him it would be kicking back on the banks of the Muscatatuck River fishing. That's very interesting that you say that, man, because I have memories of me and my uncle and my cousin and my dad going down to the Muscatatuck River and fishing all night. And I remember they would go down the bank a little bit and leave me and my cousin with a lantern, and we'd have our fishing poles alongside of the water. They'd go on down the river somewhere, but me and my cousin would be there, and we'd be listening to transistor radio, sitting out there in the middle of the night. Comfortably Numb comes on Q95, and we're like, yeah, man, out here. And us catching a bunch of drum, like a good-sized drum, and we didn't catch that many of those back then up north of there, but catching catfish. And a few different times sitting out there is really, really good memories. And when I drive back and forth to Nashville a lot, like once every week or two. And I crossed the Muscatatuck River right there. Is it north of Seymour? Just south of Seymour, somewhere right around in there. I cross it and I see Muscatatuck, and I just am drawn right back to my childhood sitting down there on the banks. I think we stopped right there off 65 probably, parked on the side of the interstate. I don't remember. It's a long time, and walked down somewhere and sat out there all night a few different times. But so there's a memory of growing up right there where you're talking about, Brian. It was good times. It was really good times. But anyway, that's a good, nice, happy place to leave that. And I appreciate you guys watching. Man, ask me some more questions like this. And I'll do my best to answer it. If you guys are enjoying me doing these, I'm out here in the car because it's kind of, Amy's doing stuff in the house. It's hard to do this in the house. The neighbor will be mowing the grass. Something like that will be going on, so I can't really go out on the porch. Just easiest place for me to go and be quiet and sit down and just be able to talk to you guys is in the car. So it's kind of comfy, and I like doing it. So every now and then if I show up in the car, I hope you understand. Not trying to be cool or whatever. I got my truck stop blanket back here on the back seat so Wendell doesn't mess it up. I was thinking, remember those in the 1960s and 70s, probably before that, the truck bench seats would have the cool covers like that. And there was a different look of like a plaid mesh or something. And I thought, man, I'd like to get that, put it on a modern car or whatever. And a couple weeks ago, I just happened to think to Google it, and I found that they make fitted stuff that looks sort of like that. It looks like it's old, 1973 truck stuff that I thought I ought to buy that. It's pretty expensive, but it's pretty expensive to have to replace your seat because your dog trashed it, coming back from the lake or something. So maybe I'll get me some seat covers. It's just too much information, isn't it? But anyway, I hope things are good with you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Much love to y'all.